Well, let's unpack all this now with Harry Verhoeven, who joins us from New York. He's a professor at the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia University. First of all, there's a lot of interested parties concerned about this conflict. Just explain to us, why does what's happening in Sudan matter to so many other countries?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Sudan is geopolitically a very important country, first of all, because of geographical location, of course, its proximity to a number of very populous African countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, first and foremost, but also just across the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. And of course, Sudan has very large diasporas in some of those countries in the Middle East and elsewhere in Africa that make it so significant. But secondly, of course, there's also Sudan's very long history of conflict and the way the conflicts in Sudan tend to spill over into neighboring conflicts. In Ethiopia, we've got a very fragile ceasefire at the moment in the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. You have major wars, of course, also as well in Egypt and in Chad, as well as in South Sudan. So the stakes in many ways couldn't be higher. And that's in part why so much of the world is so worried about what is happening at the moment in Khartoum and in other parts of Sudan.
So we've had a few false starts with a couple of ceasefires. What could be the realistic end game now for this conflict, at least in the short term? Could it be perhaps the start of Eid will trigger the gunmen to put down their weapons just for a few days, perhaps?
Perhaps, and perhaps symbolically. But the truth is that, realistically speaking, the stakes for both the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudan Armed Forces are so high, and their distrust of one another is so great, that any kind of longer-term resolution to this conflict is highly unlikely, unfortunately. Both sides distrust each other so much and really believe that their own survival is essential to the survival of Sudan as a country, that they're unwilling to make those kind of compromises. And that is terribly frustrating for ordinary people in Sudan and for Sudanese people outside the country who are so worried about their friends and family in the country at this time of the end of Ramadan and the celebration of Eid al-Fitr. But the situation is no different. And that is exactly why these mediation efforts keep failing. And are likely to continue failing, unfortunately, until one side has a clear upper hand and feels that it can accept these kind of truces.
And the issues are escalating for civilians. So where does it leave them trapped in the middle of this?
Well, it leaves them desperate, unfortunately. It leaves them looking for protection. It leaves them looking for safety, as you've heard in that latest broadcast that you've shared. People are also leaving the capital city, are leaving Khartoum, looking for safety. And the same is happening in other urban centers, in Kordofan, for example, and in Darfur, in the western part of the country. And the United Nations Secretary General has been absolutely unequivocal about this and the need to protect humanitarian workers, as well as the need to safeguard humanitarian access and humanitarian operations by other foreign countries and by other organizations. But unfortunately, neither General Burhan, neither General Hamiti have taken those calls as seriously as they should. And that's, as I said, terribly frustrating. But that's what the situation is. And this is, unfortunately, I should say, a story that we've seen coming, that we've warned about, and unfortunately that is now materializing and that risks spiraling a much broader and longer civil war.
OK, Harry Verhoeven, Professor at the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia University. Thank you very much for joining us live from New York.
You're most welcome.